The morning started like any other in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood where everyone seemed to know each other by sight, if not by name. Birds chirped, the sun filtered gently through the leaves, and the scent of fresh coffee wafted from open kitchen windows. Life moved slowly here, predictable, calm, and comfortable. Families walked their dogs. Kids rode their bikes down the street, and neighbors exchanged greetings over picket fences. For most, it was the perfect slice of suburban life. That morning, however, an unusual sense of energy had settled over one particular house at the end of the street. The house belonged to a black couple who had been part of the community for years. They were quiet, friendly, and known for volunteering at local events and helping out neighbors when they could. Today, however, their house was different. There were tents being set up in the yard, chairs lined up in neat rows, and decorations that shimmered in the sunlight. A colorful arch had been constructed at the front door, and flowers were being arranged everywhere. Guests began arriving, chatting and laughing as they stepped out of cars dressed in bright, elegant outfits. From across the street, one neighbor watched it all with a growing sense of unease. He had lived in the neighborhood for decades, priding himself on knowing the ins and outs of the area. He liked things orderly, quiet, and predictable. Big events were not unusual in themselves. There were birthday parties, small gatherings, and even occasional barbecues. But this wedding felt different to him. There were more people than he expected. The music was louder than usual, and the energy, vibrant and joyful, made him uncomfortable. He leaned on the railing of his porch, adjusting his hat, squinting as he tried to count the cars parked along the street. Something in his mind began whispering that this was unusual, that this was perhaps not just a wedding, and that maybe he should take action. The thoughts grew louder, more insistent, feeding off his anxiety and discomfort. What if something is wrong here? He muttered to himself. Better safe than sorry. His finger hovered over his phone as he contemplated making a call that he believed would protect the neighborhood. Inside the house, the couple moved calmly amid the excitement. The bride, radiant in her white dress, laughed as she adjusted a veil with the help of a cousin. The groom, smiling and confident, mingled with arriving guests, shaking hands, hugging old friends, and greeting family members who had traveled from out of town. There was no sense of danger or threat, only love, happiness, and a shared sense of celebration. Children ran through the yard, playing tag and hiding behind decorative columns, while older relatives chatted near the refreshments table, enjoying the warmth of the morning sun. Despite this peaceful scene, the neighbor across the street dialed the number he believed would alert the authorities to something suspicious. He explained carefully but nervously that he had noticed unusual activity at the house. The caller's voice was measured but tense, filled with an urgent need to make sure he was being responsible. He described the people coming and going, the decorations and the commotion, implying that something might not be right. The person on the other end of the line thanked him for the information and assured him that someone would look into it. Within minutes, a few unmarked vehicles began to appear at the end of the street. Initially, the neighbor could hardly believe it. He watched as agents and officers exited their cars, scanning the area with serious expressions. They approached the house, speaking quietly into radios, their steps purposeful. The calm, joyful scene that had been unfolding inside now felt slightly tense from the outside. Neighbors began peeking from windows and doorways, curious about the sudden appearance of law enforcement. Whispers spread along the street, growing louder as more people came out to see what was happening. Inside the house, the guests were unaware of the growing concern just outside. Music played, laughter filled the air, and conversations flowed freely. The couple moved through the crowd, greeting everyone, adjusting small details and trying to make sure everything ran smoothly. The wedding planner coordinated last-minute touches, ensuring the decorations were perfect and that everyone was ready for the ceremony. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the rhythm of the day carried a faint undertone of tension that only a few could sense. Back on the porch across the street, the neighbor shifted nervously, eyes darting between the agents and the house. He had done what he believed was the right thing, but a flicker of doubt passed over him. The officers were walking toward the house, their steps confident and deliberate, their presence imposing. He straightened up, gripping the railing tightly, feeling both a sense of pride for reporting what he thought was suspicious activity and a creeping fear of what might come next. The law enforcement team approached the front entrance, speaking briefly among themselves before knocking. Their voices were polite but authoritative. Inside, the guests paused, glancing toward the door, unsure of what to expect. Some whispered among themselves, wondering why anyone would disturb a wedding on such a bright, beautiful morning. The bride looked toward the door, a slight furrow in her brow, while the groom, sensing tension, moved to meet the officers, ready to address whatever questions they might have. As the officers entered, they began asking routine questions. They asked the couple to confirm their names, the purpose of the gathering, and the number of attendees. The couple answered calmly and politely, maintaining composure despite the intrusion. The guests, initially confused, began to realize that the officers were not there because of them personally, but because of a report from the neighbor. The tension in the room was mixed with quiet amusement and disbelief. How could anyone mistake a wedding for something suspicious? Outside, the neighbor's worry deepened. He could see the officers interacting with the couple, but he could not hear the conversation. He shifted from foot to foot, feeling a strange mix of vindication and anxiety. His mind raced with possibilities. What if the officers discovered something illegal? What if he had done the right thing, but it turned out to be dangerous? His heart pounded as he waited, the sun now higher in the sky, casting a sharp light on the unfolding scene. Inside, the couple continued to cooperate fully, providing identification and confirming the details of the event. The officers, trained to assess situations calmly and without bias, began to piece together the reality. This was a simple, joyful wedding, not the suspicious activity the neighbor had imagined. The truth started to become clearer, though the neighbor across the street had yet to realize it. He continued to watch anxiously, unaware that he was about to learn a very humbling lesson. Guests exchanged quiet glances, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others suppressing chuckles. The absurdity of the situation was hard to ignore. Here they were, dressed in their finest clothes, celebrating a marriage, while someone across the street had called in what they thought was a threat. It was an awkward and almost comical tension that hung in the air, mixing with the joy of the day. The couple, poised and composed, handled the situation with grace, ensuring that the ceremony could continue without further disruption. The neighbor remained frozen on his porch, unaware of just how mistaken his fears had been. He thought he was protecting the neighborhood, acting out of a sense of duty, yet the reality of the situation was far different. What he saw as potential danger was nothing more than a family celebrating one of the happiest days of their lives. His assumptions, fueled by a combination of discomfort and prejudice, had led him to make a decision that would soon be seen as both unnecessary and embarrassing. As the morning moved on, the tension began to ease slightly inside the house. The officers finished their verification and started to step back, understanding that there was no threat. The guests, now aware of the reason behind the presence of law enforcement, began to relax. Laughter returned, though now with an undertone of incredulity. Conversations picked up, and the bride and groom resumed their interactions, making sure the day proceeded smoothly. Outside, the neighbor remained, slowly realizing that perhaps his assumptions had been misplaced. The officers began to leave, their vehicles driving away, leaving the street once again quiet. A mix of relief and embarrassment washed over him as he watched the joyful wedding continue uninterrupted. He understood deep down that he had misread the situation, that his fears were unfounded, and that in trying to act responsibly, he had instead created unnecessary tension. By midday, the house was alive with celebration once more. Music, laughter, and chatter filled the air. Guests danced, took photos, and shared stories. The earlier tension faded into the background, leaving behind a memorable anecdote that would be retold for years, not as a scandal, but as a lesson in assumptions, perspective, and the sometimes comical consequences of fear and misunderstanding. And so, the day continued, the neighbor standing quietly, perhaps reflecting on his actions, while the couple and their guests carried on with their celebration, unaware of how much they had taught the entire neighborhood about judgment, awareness, and the simple joy of coming together to celebrate love. After the initial confusion outside the house began to settle, the morning seemed to regain a sense of rhythm. However, tension still lingered in the air, mostly around the neighbor who had made the call. He watched from his porch as the officers moved deliberately around the yard, asking questions, checking the guest list, and making subtle notes. Each movement of the officers made his heart race. He had convinced himself that he was protecting his community, but now the uncertainty of the situation made him uneasy. Inside the house, the wedding had momentarily paused. Guests were whispering quietly among themselves, trying to understand why law enforcement had arrived. Some had peeked through windows to see what was happening, and others had stepped outside, curious but careful not to interfere. The couple standing in the center of the living room maintained their composure. They were used to navigating unexpected situations with calmness, but even they could feel the odd tension in the air. The groom, tall and composed, stepped forward to greet the officers personally. His voice was calm but firm, carrying a sense of dignity and authority. He introduced himself and explained that the gathering was a private wedding. The officers listened carefully, asking routine questions about the number of attendees, the nature of the event, and whether there had been any threats reported to the couple. The groom answered each question politely and clearly, making sure to convey the peaceful and celebratory nature of the day. Meanwhile, the bride tried to ease the mood for the guests. She smiled warmly, reassuring everyone that this was simply a misunderstanding. "It's okay," she said softly, placing a hand on a friend's shoulder. "They're just doing their job. Let's not let it ruin the day. We've waited so long for this moment." Her calm presence helped soothe the rising tension. Guests began to relax slowly, realizing that there was no real danger, only a neighbor's misinterpretation of the celebration. The officers, trained to handle unexpected situations, were cautious but professional. They moved efficiently, checking IDs and verifying the details provided. It became clear to them that the report they had received was based on a misunderstanding. The scene before them was that of a typical wedding. Friends and family laughing, children playing, and adults chatting happily. There was no suspicious activity, no threat, nothing that required further concern. Back across the street, the neighbor was growing increasingly anxious. He had watched for a while, but now he felt a sinking sense of worry. What if he had overreacted? What if he had created unnecessary trouble? He fidgeted on his porch, his mind racing with thoughts about what the officers were discovering. Each step they took toward the house felt like a spotlight on him, highlighting the possible mistake he might have made. Inside, the couple continued to manage the situation with grace. The wedding planner moved quietly among the guests, ensuring that everyone remained calm and that the schedule of the ceremony stayed on track. The photographer, sensing the unusual circumstances, adjusted his angles to avoid capturing the officers while still documenting the day. It was a delicate balance between maintaining the flow of the celebration and acknowledging the strange interruption. Guests began to whisper again, some laughing softly at the absurdity of the situation. Aunts and uncles exchanged glances, shaking their heads in disbelief. "Can you believe someone actually called the FBI over a wedding?" One whispered. Children, unaware of the tension, continued to play tag and hide behind the decorations, their laughter adding a lightness to the atmosphere. The juxtaposition of serious law enforcement presence and the joyous celebration created a surreal scene that no one would soon forget. The officers, having verified the details, started to move closer to the groom. Their expressions shifted from cautious observation to polite surprise as they confirmed his identity. This was not just a private citizen getting married. This was someone with a prominent role in the state. Their approach became more respectful, more measured. They realized that the report was not only unfounded but also potentially embarrassing for the neighbor who had called them. As the realization began to sink in, the neighbor froze. He watched in disbelief as the officers spoke quietly with the groom. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. How could he have been so wrong? The tension in his body gave way to a mixture of shock and embarrassment. The sense of pride he had felt moments earlier for protecting the neighborhood evaporated, replaced by an awkward awareness of his mistake. Inside the house, the couple maintained their composure, now aware that the presence of law enforcement was beginning to make sense to the neighbors outside. They smiled politely, thanked the officers for their diligence, and reassured them that everything was perfectly legal and peaceful. The officers nodded, understanding that they had come in response to a misunderstanding and that their presence had been necessary only to verify the situation. The guests, sensing the change in energy, began to relax fully. Conversations picked up again and laughter returned. Some guests even joked quietly among themselves about the FBI wedding story, imagining how they would retell it to friends and family. Despite the initial tension, the atmosphere began to feel lighter, filled once more with the excitement and joy of the day. The bride and groom moved among their guests, exchanging smiles and ensuring that everyone felt welcome and comfortable. Outside, the neighbor was slowly coming to terms with what had happened. He watched as the officers finished their checks and started to step away from the property. Relief mingled with lingering embarrassment. He understood now that his assumptions had been hasty and unfounded, and that his fear had clouded his judgment. The realization was humbling. He had acted out of a sense of duty, but that action had caused unnecessary tension for his neighbors. The officers left the street quietly, their vehicles driving off, leaving the neighborhood once again calm and peaceful. The sounds of the wedding returned to the air, music, laughter, and conversation blending together in a symphony of normalcy. Guests moved back to the yard, resuming their places and continuing the celebration as if nothing had happened. The couple smiled, grateful that the misunderstanding had been resolved quickly and peacefully. The neighbor remained on his porch, reflecting on the morning's events. He thought about how easily fear and assumptions could escalate, how quickly a simple misunderstanding could create tension and disruption. He considered the impact of his actions not just on the couple, but on the entire neighborhood. In that quiet moment, he realized the importance of observation, patience, and understanding before jumping to conclusions. Inside the house, the ceremony began to take shape. The music shifted to a softer, more romantic tone as guests took their seats. The bride and groom shared quiet moments together, holding hands and exchanging smiles that conveyed their happiness and relief. They were surrounded by friends and family, and the earlier tension faded into the background, leaving behind only memories that would become stories told with laughter in the future. The children continued to play. The adults chatted and laughed, and the decorations shimmered in the sunlight. The day was no longer about fear or misunderstanding. It was about love, community, and the joy of celebrating together. The earlier incident had created a strange, almost surreal moment, but it had also reminded everyone of the importance of perspective and awareness. As the ceremony progressed, the neighbor finally turned away from his porch. He walked slowly inside his house, still processing what had happened. There was a lesson in humility, a reminder that fear can cloud judgment and that assumptions based on appearances are often misleading. The neighborhood had returned to its usual rhythm, but the morning's events would not be forgotten. For the couple, the wedding continued flawlessly. They exchanged vows, shared heartfelt words with each other, and celebrated the union with joy and love. The guests cheered, cried happy tears, and embraced one another, fully immersed in the moment. The earlier tension became just a story in the background, a minor interruption in what would otherwise be remembered as a perfect day. By afternoon, the atmosphere was entirely restored. Music filled the air, the sun shone brightly, and the sounds of laughter and celebration echoed throughout the yard. The neighbor, now more contemplative than anxious, could hear the happiness next door and recognize the simple truth. His fears had been unfounded, and the joy of the day was entirely intact. The story of the morning's events would later circulate quietly among the guests and neighbors. Some would tell it with humor, others with disbelief, but all would remember the unusual mix of tension and celebration that had defined the early hours. For the couple, it became a testament to their patience, composure, and ability to handle unexpected challenges with grace. As evening approached, the wedding party moved inside for the final celebrations. Music, dancing, and laughter filled the rooms, and the earlier tension became a distant memory. Guests celebrated long into the night, creating memories that would last a lifetime. The neighbor, meanwhile, quietly reflected on the events, a little wiser and more aware of the consequences of assumptions and fear. The day, which began with a sense of joy and excitement, had taken an unexpected turn. The arrival of law enforcement, the neighbor's fears, and the momentary tension added an unusual layer to the celebration. Yet in the end, the love between the couple, the support of family and friends, and the resilience of the community ensured that the day remained beautiful, meaningful, and unforgettable. The morning's tension had slowly begun to fade, but a new feeling was in the air, one that was impossible to ignore. The officers, after speaking with the couple and verifying basic details, were starting to realize that something about this wedding was not ordinary. There was an air of dignity around the groom, a confidence and calm that set him apart from anyone else in the crowd. He moved with ease, smiling at guests, exchanging polite handshakes, and speaking in a voice that carried authority without arrogance. The realization slowly began to dawn on the officers. This was not just any wedding, and the groom was not just any man. The bride, radiant in her white gown, noticed the slight shift in the officer's demeanor. She remained composed, but a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She had expected the day to be full of excitement and joy, but not quite like this. Guests, too, began to sense that something unusual was unfolding, though none of them could yet put a name to it. The air seemed charged, a mixture of curiosity, amusement, and barely contained surprise. Across the street, the neighbor continued to watch, unaware of the full truth. He had already felt embarrassed about calling the authorities, but now there was something else stirring, a vague sense of worry mixed with anticipation. He could see the officers approaching the groom, their expressions changing from cautious to polite recognition. Something significant was happening, and it was only a matter of time before the neighbor understood the magnitude of his mistake. The officers approached the groom with subtle respect, their questions shifting in tone. They began asking for verification in a quieter, more discreet way, checking identification with a degree of reverence rather than suspicion. Their earlier caution had transformed into something else entirely: recognition. The groom, calm and courteous, provided the necessary information, and as the officers processed what they saw, the moment of realization struck them all at once. The groom was not a private citizen. He held a position of significant authority. In fact, he was the governor of the state. The news spread silently among the officers first, a ripple of surprise moving through the group as they processed the reality before them. They glanced at each other, and in subtle gestures and quiet nods, they acknowledged that the situation was far from ordinary. This wedding, once thought suspicious by one anxious neighbor, was now a matter of protocol and respect. The neighbor froze as well, though he did not yet know why. He watched as the officers began to speak quietly among themselves, nodding toward the groom with expressions that were serious but tinged with surprise. Something about the scene caused his heart to skip a beat, and a sinking feeling began to spread through him. The excitement and curiosity that had accompanied his anxiety were replaced with a sharp awareness that he might have made a major mistake. Inside the house, the mood shifted subtly. Guests began whispering among themselves, sensing that the officer's behavior had changed. There was a hushed excitement now, a tension that was different from before. The bride smiled gently at her groom, who continued to address the officers with calm authority. His presence commanded respect, and everyone around him could sense it, even those who did not yet know his identity. The wedding, which had already faced an unusual interruption, was about to take on a new, almost surreal layer. The officers, now fully aware of the groom's identity, adjusted their approach. They were no longer investigating. They were performing a careful, respectful protocol. Their questions became formal but courteous, their movements deliberate but unobtrusive. They treated the couple and the guests with a level of professionalism that reflected the significance of the groom's position. The neighbor across the street, still watching, could see that something had changed but had no idea just how dramatically. The revelation, when it finally settled in, was almost cinematic. The officers, after a few quiet exchanges, confirmed among themselves that the man before them was indeed the governor. A sense of disbelief rippled through the room. Guests began to glance at each other, eyebrows raised in surprise. Some covered their mouths in quiet astonishment, realizing that the authority and calm the groom had displayed all morning now made perfect sense. The wedding had always been special, but now it carried a weight of significance that went beyond family and friends. The neighbor, sensing the shift but still unaware of the exact truth, felt a jolt of apprehension. He had called the authorities, convinced he was protecting the neighborhood from something dangerous. Instead, he had triggered an extraordinary situation in which he had unwittingly involved one of the most powerful figures in the state. His body froze, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend what was happening. The officers, now focused on protocol rather than suspicion, moved past him and toward the house, leaving him standing there, speechless and embarrassed. Inside, the guests' reactions were a mixture of awe and amusement. Some could hardly believe the irony of the situation. A simple, beautiful wedding had been interrupted by law enforcement, not because of a threat, but because a neighbor had misinterpreted the celebration. Now, with the groom's identity revealed, the absurdity of it all became clear. The couple handled the moment gracefully, acknowledging the officer's presence while reassuring their guests that everything was under control. The bride, ever composed, held her groom's hand gently. She smiled at him, conveying a mixture of pride and quiet amusement. He smiled back, a knowing, confident expression that radiated calm and authority. Together, they moved through the room, greeting guests and ensuring that the ceremony would continue without further disruption. The earlier tension, which had filled the morning with uncertainty, began to dissolve in the face of this revelation. Guests began whispering excitedly, exchanging glances filled with curiosity and disbelief. "I can't believe it," one whispered to a friend. "He's the governor?" Another nodded, still processing the moment, a wide smile spreading across their face. The realization that this ordinary-looking man, who had welcomed them all so warmly, held such an extraordinary role, added a surreal energy to the wedding. The story would surely be remembered for years as one of the most unexpected twists in any celebration. The officers, now fully aware of the situation, treated the wedding with respect and care. They discreetly finished their verification, ensuring that protocol was complete, but made it clear that there was no cause for concern. Their approach was professional but unobtrusive, allowing the couple and guests to return to their celebration. The neighbor across the street, meanwhile, was left frozen in place, slowly realizing the full weight of his mistake. Embarrassment and disbelief washed over him in equal measure. He had acted out of fear and suspicion, and now he could see that his assumptions had been entirely wrong. The officer's respectful treatment of the groom, combined with the obvious importance of the individual, made him feel small and foolish. His heart raced and he shifted uncomfortably, wishing he could undo the call he had made earlier that morning. The guests, sensing that the situation had been fully clarified, began to laugh softly, some covering their mouths to stifle their amusement. The juxtaposition of the neighbor's fear, the officer's careful respect, and the groom's calm authority created a scene that was almost comical in its irony. The wedding had transformed from a joyful celebration into an unforgettable story of misunderstanding, authority, and revelation. The bride and groom, aware of the attention but committed to keeping the day joyous, moved forward with their plans. The ceremony, which had been momentarily paused, resumed with a quiet dignity. Guests settled into their seats, children ran to the sides to play, and the music shifted to a softer, more romantic tone. The moment, now tinged with both awe and amusement, added a unique layer to the wedding that no one would forget. Outside, the neighbor finally moved, stepping away from his porch with slow, hesitant movements. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, embarrassment, relief, and a dawning understanding of how assumptions can mislead. He realized, with some humility, that his actions had been unnecessary, and that the day's joy had been momentarily disrupted by his fears. It was a lesson he would carry with him, one that highlighted the importance of observation, patience, and understanding before jumping to conclusions. Inside, the guests clapped politely as the ceremony resumed, a mixture of celebration and quiet amusement in their expressions. Some whispered jokes among themselves about the morning's events, imagining how they would retell the story to friends and family. The couple moved gracefully among their guests, offering smiles, hugs, and quiet words of reassurance. Their composure turned a potentially awkward moment into one of elegance and dignity. As the morning continued, the officers completed their duties and prepared to leave. They exchanged respectful nods with the couple and guests, ensuring that their presence would not overshadow the celebration. The neighbor watched them drive away, a mixture of relief and lingering embarrassment washing over him. He knew that the day would continue, that the wedding would remain joyous, but he also knew that he had learned an unforgettable lesson. The energy inside the house shifted once more, returning to pure celebration. Music, laughter, and conversation filled the rooms. Guests danced, children played, and the bride and groom shared quiet, joyful moments together. The earlier tension, once so heavy and uncertain, was now replaced with an atmosphere of love, joy, and human connection. The revelation of the groom's identity had transformed the day, but it had also reinforced the importance of perspective, patience, and grace under pressure. By midday, the wedding had fully resumed its rhythm. Guests mingled, shared stories, and laughed freely. The neighbor, quietly reflecting on the morning's events, realized that he had been given a rare glimpse into the consequences of fear and assumption. The day, which began with tension and anxiety, had evolved into a celebration not just of love but of understanding, humility, and the unexpected surprises that life can bring. The moment the officers realized who the groom was, a wave of relief swept over the guests. Laughter started quietly at first, then grew as people shared glances that said, "Can you believe this?" The tension that had hung over the wedding all morning began to dissolve. The couple moved through the crowd, greeting their friends and family with warm smiles as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside, many of the guests could not stop talking quietly about what had just unfolded. The neighbor across the street, who had called the authorities, still stood frozen on his porch. His eyes widened as he watched the officers finish their checks and slowly leave. The sense of embarrassment was almost overwhelming. He had acted out of fear, believing he was protecting his community, but now he realized how completely mistaken he had been. His mind raced, imagining how this story might spread if people found out. The morning that had seemed normal to him now felt like a moment he would never forget. Inside the house, the bride and groom took a moment to breathe. The groom smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and whispered to his bride, "Let's get back to our day." She nodded, squeezing his hand, and together they walked through their guests, ensuring that everyone felt comfortable and welcome. The joy of the day had not been ruined. If anything, it had grown. There was a strange energy in the air, a mix of amusement, disbelief, and a renewed sense of community. Guests began talking quietly among themselves, laughing softly at the absurdity of what had happened. Some shook their heads. Others whispered jokes about the neighbor's overreaction. "I can't believe he actually called the authorities," one guest said, smiling. Another added, "And we were all just here to celebrate a wedding." The moment became a shared experience, one that brought the guests closer together. It was a reminder of how small misunderstandings could create big stories, and how important it was to approach situations with calm and patience. The couple, aware of the laughter and whispers, decided to acknowledge the moment without letting it overshadow their celebration. The groom made a few quiet comments to the officers, thanking them for their professionalism, and the bride reassured the guests that the day would continue as planned. Their grace and composure turned a potentially embarrassing situation into a lesson in dignity and patience. Guests admired them not only for their love but also for the way they handled unexpected challenges. Outside, the neighbor finally moved from his porch, walking slowly inside his house. The weight of the morning's events pressed on him. He understood that his assumptions had been hasty and fueled by fear, and that he had created tension where none existed. The realization was humbling. He thought about how easily people could misinterpret situations and how quickly misunderstandings could escalate. The embarrassment he felt was real, but it was also a moment of learning, a reminder that observation, patience, and understanding were far more important than fear or suspicion. Back inside, the wedding slowly returned to its natural rhythm. Music filled the room again, this time without any underlying tension. Guests danced, children ran through the yard, and laughter echoed throughout the house. The couple moved among their friends and family, sharing hugs, smiles, and quiet words of gratitude. Every interaction carried warmth and a sense of relief. The earlier interruption had not ruined the day. It had given the celebration an unexpected story that everyone would remember. The officers, having completed their verification and protocol, prepared to leave. They exchanged polite nods with the couple and guests, acknowledging the unique situation without making anyone feel uncomfortable. Their professionalism and discretion helped restore a sense of normalcy. Guests waved as the officers drove away, and the neighbor watched quietly from his window, still reflecting on the morning's events. The conversation among the guests shifted naturally to the day's celebrations. Some shared stories from their own lives, while others laughed about how the wedding had briefly become the center of a misunderstanding. Children played in the yard, their laughter filling the space with lightness. The bride and groom smiled at each other, recognizing that this day, while full of surprises, was theirs to enjoy. The earlier tension now felt like a distant memory, replaced by joy, gratitude, and connection. As the afternoon wore on, the energy of the wedding became even more vibrant. Guests danced together, shared meals, and captured photographs to remember the day. The couple moved through the crowd, ensuring that everyone felt included and celebrated. Their composure, humor, and kindness set the tone for the rest of the day. What had begun as a moment of tension became an opportunity for everyone to appreciate resilience, patience, and the ability to navigate unexpected situations with grace. The neighbor, from his home across the street, continued to watch the wedding from a distance. He felt a mixture of relief and humility. The situation had not escalated into something negative, but it had taught him a valuable lesson about assumptions, fear, and the consequences of jumping to conclusions. He reflected on the importance of understanding and observing before taking action. The morning had left him wiser, more aware, and perhaps a little more cautious about making judgments based solely on appearances. Inside, the wedding carried on beautifully. The couple exchanged quiet moments, holding hands and sharing smiles. Their guests, fully relaxed now, celebrated with joy and enthusiasm. The incident with the authorities and the neighbor had become part of the story of the day, a story that would be retold with laughter and disbelief in the future. The energy in the house was contagious, spreading warmth, happiness, and a sense of togetherness. Conversations among the guests grew more personal. Friends and family shared memories, recounted funny anecdotes, and expressed their happiness for the couple. Children continued to play games, run through the yard, and enjoy the freedom of the celebration. The music shifted to lively tunes, encouraging dancing and laughter. The day, which had begun with a hint of tension, had transformed into a full celebration of love, community, and human connection. The couple, aware that their wedding had briefly become the center of attention in an unusual way, chose to embrace the situation with humor and grace. They shared quiet jokes with each other about the morning's events and ensured that their guests felt comfortable and included. Their composure turned a potentially awkward situation into a story that everyone would remember fondly. Guests began to recount the events quietly among themselves, marveling at the irony of the situation. "Can you believe the neighbor actually called the authorities?" One whispered, trying not to laugh. Another added, "And we were just here to celebrate a wedding. It's almost unbelievable." The story, while embarrassing for the neighbor, became a source of amusement and connection for everyone else. It was a reminder that sometimes life had a way of surprising us in unexpected and ironic ways. The afternoon continued with a series of small, meaningful moments. Guests shared quiet conversations, children played games, and the couple took photographs to remember their special day. Music, laughter, and joyful chatter filled the air. The earlier interruption, once so tense, had faded into the background, leaving only stories to tell and lessons to remember. The neighbor, reflecting on the day from his home, recognized the importance of humility. He understood that fear and assumptions could lead to unnecessary tension and embarrassment. The morning had been a wake-up call, a reminder that observation, patience, and understanding were far more valuable than jumping to conclusions. The experience left him thoughtful, more aware, and perhaps ready to approach future situations with a clearer perspective. Back inside, the wedding celebration continued seamlessly. Guests danced, shared meals, and enjoyed the atmosphere. The couple moved gracefully through the crowd, offering smiles, hugs, and words of thanks. The earlier tension, once so sharp, had been replaced by joy, laughter, and a sense of togetherness. The morning's events had become part of the story, a chapter that added depth, humor, and perspective to the day. By evening, the energy of the celebration had reached its peak. Guests laughed, danced, and shared heartfelt moments. Children played freely, couples embraced, and friends and family came together to honor the union of the couple. The neighbor, finally stepping back from his reflections, watched the celebration continue from a distance, quietly acknowledging the lesson he had learned. The couple, despite the unusual interruption, remained composed, kind, and joyful. Their ability to handle the unexpected with grace inspired their guests. The wedding, which had briefly faced tension and misunderstanding, had transformed into a story of love, patience, and community. The earlier events became a memorable anecdote, told quietly with laughter and amazement, reminding everyone that sometimes life's surprises could be both humbling and entertaining. As night approached, the celebration began to wind down. Guests gathered for final photographs, shared hugs, and exchanged heartfelt farewells. Music played softly in the background, and the couple took a quiet moment to reflect on the day. Despite the morning's unusual events, the wedding had remained joyous, meaningful, and memorable. The lessons learned from patience, understanding, and humility would stay with everyone long after the celebration ended. The neighbor, finally able to step away from his thoughts, realized the full impact of the day. He understood that fear and assumptions could create unnecessary tension, but that kindness, patience, and understanding could restore balance. The wedding had become a reminder of how quickly misunderstandings could arise, and how gracefully they could be handled when people approached situations with empathy and calm. By the end of the day, the neighborhood had returned to its usual calm, but the story of the morning's events would be remembered for years. Guests left with memories of laughter, joy, and unexpected twists. The couple, surrounded by love and celebration, had managed to turn an unusual situation into a day filled with meaning and connection. The neighbor, having learned a valuable lesson, reflected quietly on the power of observation, humility, and understanding. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the wedding celebration slowly transitioned from the bright, bustling energy of the afternoon into a softer, more intimate evening. The warm golden light spilled across the yard, casting long shadows over the guests and the decorations. The sounds of laughter, conversation, and music mingled with the gentle rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. It was a perfect, calm moment, and yet the story of the morning lingered in the minds of everyone present. It had become more than just a wedding. It was now a lesson in perception, humility, and understanding. Inside the house, the couple moved among their guests with quiet elegance, checking in with everyone to make sure they were comfortable and happy. The bride's smile never faded. Her laughter, soft but genuine, created an atmosphere of warmth. The groom, calm and assured, guided friends and family with gentle words, making sure that despite the unusual events of the day, the focus remained on the love and joy they were celebrating. It was a delicate balance, but they handled it effortlessly. The neighbor across the street, who had unknowingly sparked the day's earlier tension, had now stepped back from the edge of embarrassment and into a state of reflection. He watched quietly from his window, sipping a cup of tea, feeling the weight of his actions. Fear had driven him to make a call that he thought was necessary to protect the neighborhood, but he now understood how quickly assumptions could mislead. He realized that his perception had been clouded by his own discomfort with the unfamiliar, and that this day had become an unexpected lesson in humility. Within the yard, guests began to settle into the evening with a sense of peace. Conversations became deeper, more personal. Friends shared memories. Relatives told stories, and even casual acquaintances found themselves drawn together by the unusual events that had marked the morning. The laughter that once bubbled with light-hearted amusement now carried warmth and sincerity. The guests were no longer just attendees. They were witnesses to a story that went beyond the ceremony, a story about assumptions, community, and human understanding. The couple took a quiet moment together. Standing near the arch that had been decorated so beautifully for the ceremony, they held hands and looked out over the yard filled with smiling faces, laughter, and music. "We made it through the day," the groom said softly, a faint smile on his face. The bride nodded, her eyes reflecting gratitude and relief. "And everyone is still smiling," she replied. "That's what matters most." In that moment, the couple understood that the unexpected disruption had not diminished their day. It had enriched it, creating a story that would be remembered far longer than any ordinary wedding. Some guests had moved to the side of the yard, quietly discussing the neighbor's report and the officer's reaction. They shared incredulous laughs about how seriously the situation had been taken, and yet they also recognized the importance of perspective. "It's amazing how quickly assumptions can spread," one said, "and how carefully someone has to act before knowing the full story." Another nodded in agreement, reflecting on the human tendency to fear what is unfamiliar or different. These conversations were quiet but meaningful, showing that even a moment of misunderstanding could spark awareness and dialogue. The neighbor, still observing from his home, could see the joy and unity in the yard. He realized that despite his actions, the couple had handled everything with grace and patience. He felt a mixture of regret and admiration. Regret for the unnecessary tension he had caused, and admiration for the couple's ability to maintain calm and kindness in the face of it. The morning had been a humbling experience, and he now recognized the importance of careful observation, empathy, and reflection before jumping to conclusions. As evening settled fully, The wedding transitioned into a quieter, more personal part of the celebration. Music softened, candles were lit, and guests gathered in small groups for conversations and photographs. The children, tired from a long day of playing, ran around a little less energetically, their laughter becoming softer, yet still full of life. Friends and family shared intimate moments of connection, embracing the joy and significance of the day. The bride and groom moved quietly through the groups, taking a moment to speak with each guest personally. They thanked everyone for coming, expressed their love and appreciation, and ensured that the day's story, both the celebration and the disruption, would be remembered fondly. Their grace, patience, and warmth left a lasting impression on everyone present. Even the minor chaos of the morning had been transformed into a story of resilience, love, and understanding. Guests began to reflect on the lessons they had witnessed. Many quietly discussed how easy it was to misinterpret situations and how quickly fear and assumptions could lead to unnecessary tension. Others noted the importance of humility and patience, and how the couple's composure had turned a potentially negative experience into something memorable and positive. The day had provided an unspoken lesson, that understanding and kindness can overcome fear and suspicion, and that moments of misunderstanding can become opportunities for growth. The neighbor, finally stepping away from his window, moved through his house with a contemplative air. He replayed the events of the morning in his mind, acknowledging the mistakes he had made. He thought about how he could approach the future differently, how observation, patience, and understanding were far more powerful than fear or assumptions. The lesson was personal, quiet, and profound, and it would stay with him for a long time. Back in the yard, the celebration continued peacefully. Guests mingled, shared food, and laughed together. The music encouraged dancing, and even the shyest guests found themselves joining in. The couple watched hand in hand as the day unfolded into a memory they would cherish forever. Despite the morning's unusual events, the essence of the day remained pure: love, joy, and connection. As the night grew darker, the atmosphere took on a magical quality. Twinkling lights, lanterns, and candles created a warm glow that bathed the yard. Shadows danced across the faces of smiling guests, creating moments of beauty and intimacy. Conversation softened, laughter became gentle, and the sense of togetherness deepened. The couple stood together, absorbing the serenity and contentment that filled the air. They understood that this day, with all its surprises and lessons, had become a story of resilience, patience, and human connection that would be remembered far longer than a traditional wedding. The neighbor, reflecting on the day, realized that his actions had not caused harm in the long run, but they had left an important lesson. Fear and assumptions could easily mislead, but empathy, observation, and humility could restore balance. The wedding, in all its beauty, had shown him the importance of understanding before judgment. He quietly acknowledged the lesson, grateful for the chance to witness grace, patience, and celebration firsthand. Guests continued to celebrate, moving from dancing to conversations, from laughter to quiet moments of reflection. The children, now tired, played near the edges of the yard, their joy undiminished by the passing hours. The music shifted occasionally to slower, more sentimental tunes, allowing couples to embrace and share intimate moments. Friends and family, inspired by the day's events,